Okay.
That's the notice that recording is in progress. Okay. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight to talk about supporting healthy, intimate relationships for our young people. My name is Laura Caruso from Palm Together, and we are very fortunate to have Dr. Richard Weissbourd with us tonight to lead us in this discussion. Dr. Weissbourd is a senior lecturer on education at the Harvard Graduate School of Education and the Kennedy School of Government. He is also the director of the Human Development Program and the director of the Make Caring Common project. He led the research behind a report called The Talk, which is the basis for our conversation tonight and a piece that I highly encourage everyone to read. We will drop this into the chat so you can access it. Last year, Dr. Weissbourd virtually visited Pelham for the first time for a community conversation around raising caring, happy children, organized by the Colonial PTA, and we're thrilled to have him back. As for context for why Pelham Together decided to host this particular conversation, there is a lot of public and private discussion around the effect of the pandemic on our children. The impact of prolonged periods of isolation, separation, loss, and uncertainty have and will continue to have an effect on this generation of young people of all ages, academically, socially, and emotionally. So as parents, we search for ways to stay hopeful, and often the positive relationships in our lives can be a beautiful source of that hope. One of the many important kinds of relationships in our lives are romantic relationships. And as young people of a certain age, they begin their journey into this realm. This is both exciting and terrifying, hopeful and anxiety-ridden for both the teen and the parents of that teen. The point of tonight's discussion is to provide us with some information and expert advice so we have a better understanding of the complexities of these relationships for young people in today's world. And with that, we hope that as parents, teachers, caregivers, we feel more prepared to guide our young people in developing intimate relationships that truly bring strength and hope. Dr. Weissbourd has planned a very thoughtful presentation for us tonight that will begin with about 20 minutes on topics that include ways parents can actively prepare our kids to form these healthy relationships and the common misconceptions that often prevent us from doing so. We'll move into a 10-minute Q&A where Dr. Weissbourd will take questions about what he's just presented, and you can either type those questions into the chat or use the raise hand function and we'll ask you to unmute to ask the question. After those 10 minutes, Dr. Weissbourd will continue the presentation, sharing information for about another 15 minutes on how it is that we combat misogyny and sexual harassment in our society, the fact that it's normalized, and how important it is to do so because of the damage it does to a young person's capacity to form these healthy relationships. An important side note here, and another reason we decided to host this conversation. Pelham's own student data collected from last year from our high schoolers show 35% of our non-binary students report experiencing peer sexual harassment. 24% of female students report the same. The highest level of these incidents occur in the 11th and 12th grade. It is an important piece of a conversation. Finally, we'll end with a Q&A session where we'll go through the list of pre-submitted questions from many of you, and we'll ask Dr. Weissbourd to reflect on those if they haven't already been touched on. I want to remind everyone that we're recording tonight's event and we'll make it available tomorrow morning on the Palm Together website. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Weissbourd.
Thank you so much, Laura. I'm sorry I'm not there with all of you in person, and that we're in this age. I hope we all get to meet in person one of these days. Laura has been absolutely wonderful to work with in setting this up, and I appreciate you all being here. This is not an easy topic, but it is, as you know, a critically important topic. So I'm delighted that you're willing to think about it and engage with it with me. As Laura said, I want to talk about the nature of love, what love is, and I also want to talk about how we might prepare young people for romantic love. And if we have time, and I hope we will, I want to talk about preventing misogyny and harassment. But let me just start with a question for you, if we can do a really quick exercise. And the question is, so a young person, let's say 17 years old, 18 years old, says, I'm in a relationship with somebody and I don't know whether I'm in love or not. How do you know when you're in love? How in this flow of feelings do you have for another person, do we pause and say, that's love, I'm in love? And I'm wondering how you would answer that question from a young person. And if you could just raise your hand or put something in the chat, I just would love to hear your thoughts. I'm gonna give you one other option too. What if the young person says to you, I know I'm really attracted to this person and I feel sort of infatuated with this person, but how do you tell the difference between infatuation and love? That could be the question as well.
It's going to take a very brave soul to get in there.
This is the hard one. We're starting with the hard one. Chris, thank you for going for it. Do you make each other better people? Wonderful.
There's another one, Dr. Weissbourd. Do you see that?
Yep, I would say when you think of them and care for them and how it benefits you. Great, thank you. They put your happiness and well-being first. Great. Maybe we'll just get one more. I'm going to come back to some of these. Can you be yourself? Great. You want to make them happy as well as yourself. Yeah. So, but I would ask you all to think with all of these, you could be infatuated with someone and they might, and you might want to make them happy as well as yourself. You might even put their happiness first, or they might put your happiness first, but it still could be just infatuation. So just to think for a minute about, are there some criteria that would make it love in your mind? But these are wonderful. All right, let me share some thoughts with you about this. And again, I will come back to these. So, Freud said there are two things that are most important in life. One is to work and the other is to love. And I would argue that love is more important than work. And we have a amount of literature that suggests to us that the most important thing that we can do is to learn to love other people. We have huge industries in this country that are designed to prepare people for work, schools among them. We do next to nothing to prepare young people for the tender, subtle, courageous, disciplined, focused work of learning how to love somebody else. I mean, learning how to love somebody else well and learning how to be loved well. Because of that epic failure, there are all kinds of emotional and financial costs, divorce, depression, alcoholism, domestic abuse because of this failure. Sex ed in this country, and we're not addressing it. So sex ed in this country tends to be disaster prevention, how not to get pregnant, how not to get STDs. It is not about the work of learning how to have a close, intimate, deep, caring, ethical relationship with somebody else. I think many of us as parents are disabled in this conversation too, that we feel, about half of marriages, almost half of marriages are ending in divorce. About a third of people who are married or maybe higher are in high conflict marriages or marriages where they're not happy. So I think a lot of us as parents feel like we haven't succeeded ourselves and we don't have the wisdom to pass on to young people about love. We fuss a lot in this country about the sex talk and when to have the sex talk with our kids. I think we should be fussing about a much more important talk, which is the love talk. How do we talk to our kids about love and what it really means to be in a loving relationship? And I think this conversation is hard. And I think it's hard because, Tolstoy says there's many loves as there are hearts, that at any one point in time, what we all define as love, and I'm going to share some data with you about this, is very different. We are not often talking about the same thing. I also think it's hard because love changes developmentally. And I think many of you who are older adults know what I'm describing. And when I said I love you to my wife on our wedding day, I mean something very different than when I say it now, 35 years later. These are very different kinds of love. And I don't think we have vocabulary for describing these very different kinds of love. And because we don't have this vocabulary and because we don't engage in these conversations with teens, we have created a vacuum. And I think the vacuum is filled by culture, by media, by television, by songs, that we have abdicated responsibility to popular culture to teach our kids what love is. And what they're learning is that love is conflated with lust, with infatuation, that love is a type of preoccupation that is undeniable. I think that movie images of love have probably been far more damaging to kids than movie images of violence. There are songs that I love, like songs by Adele, that suggest that you should hang in there in a relationship, even if it becomes degrading. Even if I'm black and blue, I'm gonna, in a sense, hang on to you. The Temptation song, which I love, Ain't Too Proud to Beg. I mean, when you think about the lyrics of these songs, when you think about Shakespeare's Sonnet 116, let me not to the marriage of true minds admitted impediments. Love is not love when it alteration finds. And on, it suggests or bends with the remover to remove that you should love somebody even if they don't love you anymore. I mean, some of our most wonderful poets who have said extremely profound things about love have also said things about love that I think are misguiding. And the stories that we don't tell is the dramas of mature love in our popular culture. The focused, nuanced, exciting work of really learning how to develop an intimate relationship with somebody else. The Odyssey is about Odysseus's adventures. It's not about how he can figure out how to have a relationship with Penelope, which is can be another exciting and adventurous and perilous adventure. All of our TV shows, not all of them, many of them, Sopranos, Ray Donovan, Mad Men, Breaking Bad, are about men who are having this excitement outside of their marriage that's very intoxicating, who can't figure out how to work out problems in their marriage or to experience excitement within their marriage. Their wives tend to be anchors, dead weights. I will say in these television shows. I will say that there is one TV show that I think there's probably more that I think has wonderful images of love, and it is Friday Night Lights. But it is very rare that we see on TV a couple that has a really thoughtful, generous, mature relationship. So I want to share with you a PowerPoint. I'm going to talk for about 10 or 15 minutes or so. That's going to hopefully get us further into this. And I want to raise a couple of challenges with you too. Sorry, let me screen share. Okay, so here is the good news. The good news is that a large majority of young people in our surveys, and we did a national survey, actually want some form of guidance on the emotional aspects of romantic relationships. Over 70% of respondents wanted more information from their parents about one of the following: how to develop a mature relationship, how to avoid getting hurt in a relationship, and how to begin a relationship. Similar majorities want this information from schools. Almost 2/3 of respondents wish they had received guidance on one of these aspects of a healthy romantic relationship from school. So I think this leaves us with 4 challenges. How can adults help young people distinguish between caring, mature love and immature, damaging notions of love that I want to address this. I think we also need to better understand and face squarely young people's relationship challenges, what they're actually going through at the moment. And I want to engage you in thinking about that. Thirdly, I'd like us to think about how can educators and parents better prepare young people for caring, ethical relationships, as Laura mentioned. And again, I'm hoping to talk about preventing misogyny and sexual harassment. So when we ask young high school students and young adults what love is, our definitions tended to fall into these different, the definitions they came up with tended to fall into these categories. That you know you're in love, and you can see the resonance of these categories in popular culture, where they might come from in popular culture. Love is a physical, chemical attraction. Love is synchronicity, identical consciousness. We share each other's thoughts. We don't really need to speak. We have such a deep understanding with each other. Often we get love as preoccupation. The person that I'm in love with is, as Helen Fisher says, camping in my head. I'm consumed with this person. Love is something that just feels fated, inevitable, undeniable, forever. Love is self-fulfillment. Remember Jerry Maguire, you complete me. This idea that the person that you are a part and the person that you love, if you are in love, is making you whole. And that's the feeling of being whole in a relationship. And love is dependence. This is somebody that I can't bear to live without. I think this is very different from the markers of what ethical, mature love is. And Chris, I agree with you. I think the marker of mature love is, does this person make me, and do I make this person a better person, more compassionate, more generous, more hopeful, more self-aware, more self-respecting, more generative, more productive? That this is what mature love is experienced as. It hopefully includes lots of feelings of imagination and infatuation, but it also has these characteristics, that you have some experience of deeply appreciating someone else and they're deeply appreciating you in a way that makes you a better person. John Steinbeck calls it an outpouring of what is good in oneself. One of the things that I have to explain to my students is that, when I talk about my relationship with my wife now, she's downstairs, so I'm going to say this quietly. I'm not consumed by her. I'm not preoccupied with her all the time. But that's because we have a very bottom line and deep appreciation and commitment to each other. And my not being preoccupied with her allows me to be generative in the world, to attend to other people and to attend to other relationships. This isn't to say that young love isn't exciting. I think there is something about young love and older, and love at older, for older people at later stages, that feels irreducible and spiritual and ancient and ineffable and timeless for many people. But I want to suggest that love is also not infatuation, but imagination, and for some, moral imagination. That Romeo and Juliet and West Side Story are both stories, for example, about the way the world is improved when we learn how to love, and when we learn how to love people who may be different from us. That love has this capacity to transform, and it's a way of creating a better world. And in that sense, it's imagination and moral imagination. Sorry, I'm just having a little slide trouble. There it is. Okay. And there are capacities and skills that research suggests are central to caring healthy relationships. One is this capacity to scan for the positive. This is John Gottman's research, that when you are in a healthy relationship, you, rather than scanning for the negative, you are able to scan for the positive. And relationships that are enduring and robust and really deepen tend to have this quality. And that you have the capacity to find gratification in your partner's gratifications. And so these are the kinds of capacities that I think we have to be preparing young people to do and to be in relationships, to look for what is positive and to experience what's gratifying. And that doesn't mean not being critical, but it does mean being able to see what is positive and uplifting about somebody else. The problem is when we ask young people, what qualities are you looking for in a long-term partner, and are they the qualities that are the basis for long-term love? These are the kind of things that we find. We did a survey of 7 colleges and 5 high schools. These are different types of colleges around the country, different types of high schools. I don't want to in any way suggest this is representative. I think it's suggestive, though. And one of the things that we ask is, what are the characteristics of your ideal husband or wife? Or we should have asked partner. Rank these qualities from 1 to 7, with 1 being your most preferred and 7 being your least. Popular, attractive, intelligent, kind, high potential for success, fun to be with, similar religious beliefs. And the thing that was somewhat, disconcerting is that kind comes in 4th. It comes in 4th for men. It comes in 2nd for women. Fun to be with comes in 1st. And sometimes when people are saying fun to be with, we look deeper into this. They mean kind as part of fun to be with. But, I think healthy romantic relationship has to be based fundamentally on kindness. That you cannot have a close, deepening, intimate relationship that makes you better, another person better, if you don't have the capacity to be kind. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about the second challenge that I raised, which is, how can adults better understand and face squarely young people's actual relationship struggles? And I'm very eager to hear your questions about what we just talked about too. So we will come back to some of the themes that I just discussed. But in terms of relationship challenge, I'm going to ask you just to make some guesses about these things. And Eileen said that she would monitor your responses in the chat. So what % of Harvard freshmen students were virgins in April of their freshman year? And this is pre-pandemic. So let me clarify this. The pandemic has changed all this. This is pre-pandemic. Do you think 10% of Harvard freshmen were virgins, 30%, 50%, 70%, or 90%? And if you could put in the chat 10, 30, 50, 70, 90, that would be great.
We have 2 30s, a 50, 50, 50, 50, 30, 30, 30, 30.
Okay, great. So we have a lot of
30s and 50s.
30s and 50s.
170 now.
Great. What % of Duke students who had more than 1 sexual contact in the last semester? And that's including hooking up, which ranges from everything from making out to intercourse. So again, this could be just making out at a party. What
90,
% do you think?
50. I think there was another 50, 90, 90, 30, 70, 75, 70.
Great, thank you. All right, so it seems like we're in the 70 range pretty much with this one.
Yeah.
What % of 18 to 19-year-olds nationally had more than 1 sexual partner in the last year? 10, 30, 50, 70, 90?
I think a 10, a 70, 50, 10, 30, 70, 70, 30, 50, 25, 70. It's all
Great.
over. This one's all over.
The place. Okay. Last one, % of 18 to 20-year-olds dating casually. And the other options are not in a relationship, dating exclusively, cohabitating, or married. These are 18 to 25-year-olds who are dating casually.
$70, 20, lots of 70s, 70, 70, 70, 70, 50.
Okay. Great. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
So here are the answers to your questions. The percentage, I'm sorry, I'm going to skip this one. The percentage of students who have hooked up more than 10 times in college, 2.5 times a year. We don't need to do this one. But I would ask you to try and imagine, what is a half a hookup? What is 2.5? But here's the answer to your question. The % of Harvard freshman students who are virgins in April of their freshman year is 70%. It's not 30% or 50%, it is 70%. The percent of Duke students who had more than one sexual partner, including hooking up in the last year, I think you're in the 70 to 90 range, is 30%. The percent of 18-year-olds nationally, this is the Center for Disease Control, who had more than one sexual partner in the last year, I think you're in the 50% range with this one, is 24%. Only 5.5% had more than 4 partners. The relationship status of 18 to 25-year-olds, how many are dating casually? I think you were all over the place on this one, from 25 to 75%. The answer is 8%. 27% are dating exclusively. This is child trends. 20% were cohabitating, 25% no relationship, 20% were married. Which one of these would you most, we also asked, sorry, I gotta go back. By senior year in college, only 20% of students have hooked up 10 or more times. That's an average of only 2.5 hookups a year. We also asked people in a survey, which of these would you most prefer to happen on a Friday or Saturday night? Sex with someone you're in a serious relationship, sex with someone you don't know well, sex with a friend, hooking up, none of these. The answers we got to this one, only 9, is that 47% of men wanted to have sex with someone in a serious relationship, 45% of women, only 13% of men and 14% of women wanted to be hooking up. Only 19% of high school students and 6% of college students wanted to be single and sexually active, while females were less likely than males to desire casual hooking up or sex. A significant majority of men too are not interested in repeated random hookups or sex. Research by Amy Shallett at the University of Massachusetts indicates that boys and young men are far more fearful about sex and far more interested in romance than is commonly believed. And the reason that I am making a fuss about this and bringing it to your attention is I think this common understanding of the problem is our young people are kind of dysregulated, impulsive, hooking up like crazy in a way that can be exhibitionistic and devaluing intimacy, badly mischaracterizes the problem. And the reality is that most young people are anxious, they're inhibited, they're self-protective, they're worried about whether they can have a close and deep and lasting relationship. They don't feel casual about sexual contacts. The other reason that I think this data is so important is because so many young people feel like there is something wrong with them, that they feel defective because they're not hooking up. Yet they are not the exception, they are the norm. And the more we keep this narrative going, and it's a very popular narrative among adults, that young people are hooking up wildly, the more it feeds into this idea that there's something wrong with me if I'm not hooking up. And that makes it so important to correct the narrative, for adults to be talking about what's actually happening in high school and college in terms of sexual relationships. Okay, I want to talk about challenge number 3, the challenge of preparing young people for romantic love. But I see somebody raise their hand, and maybe, Laura, this is a good time to stop and I can take some questions and then I can go into this next section. Does that work?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to stop screen sharing so I can see everybody.
Okay.
So that was Kim P. who raised her hand. Kim, if you want to unmute yourself.
Oh, I apologize. I actually, that was an accident, but on that note, you know what? My dog needed to go out and I carried the phone with me. So I apologize. It must have been a slip of the thumb. But on that note, I would have a question. Will the slides be available for email? Because I am the mother of teens and I would love to show them those numbers, those statistics, you know. I
am happy to share some of the stats. What I worry about with just the slides is the source, getting the sources right, the years right, all that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can share with you more formally in some way.
And just how to broach these topics, you know, with the, you know, the kids. It's just a challenge, you know, as much as you know, when you're the mother, you know, and not,
Yeah.
and, you know, try to be open with them. You know,
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, you know, I am, and by the way, I just have to comment, when I look at who's here, it looks like there are only a few dads, and dads really need to be part of this conversation.
I'm not getting sound.
I'm sorry, I muted you by mistake. My bad.
Oh,
No problem.
Okay, sorry, Dr. Weissbourd.
You hear what I said? You hear what I was cracking on dads. Did you hear me?
We did hear you say that dads need to be part of this conversation.
Dads need to be part of it.
And
Be
if
part of it.
if there is no dad involved, also, like I just for myself, I'm a single parent. So, you know, I have a son, and how to talk to him is it, you know, it's an issue.
And
Now,
I
we
just
have
want to
these
interject.
questions.
Oh, sorry. A couple people just put in the chat that their husbands are sitting next to them.
Oh, great, great. Well, I won't be, I won't be too hard on the dads.
Dr. Weissbourd, that is one of the questions we have planned for the end. If you want to take it now, you're more than welcome. Or
The question of how to talk to young people about romantic
in
relationships.
particular, single parents speaking to children of the opposite sex.
Yeah. So, I mean, let me just share just a few general thoughts about this and then answer the specific question. I mean, I think the general thoughts is that there's a range of conversations that we need to have with young people about both romantic love and sexuality. And I think, in my mind, and some of those conversations need to happen proactively. I think some of those conversations need to happen reactively. And what I mean by reactively is that we're watching a TV show with them, and there's a romantic relationship, and they're ingesting some image of what a romantic relationship is. And if that's a troubling image, we have to talk about it. Whether you're a single parent or have a partner or not, we have to talk about it. If there's a troubling image of sexuality, if there's a troubling image of misogyny, if there's a form of harassment going on, we have to talk about it. Our song lyrics, I don't mean to sound Puritan about this, but our song lyrics, some of them are awful. I mean, they are incredibly misogynistic and degrading to women. We've got to talk about those things. So I think most of these conversations actually happen reactively if we're attentive to what our kids are hearing all the time and seeing all the time, if we seize those opportunities. There are other conversations we have to have proactively. I think we have to certainly talk to our kids about safety. And we have to talk about consent. And I was going to talk about this later. We have to talk about what coercion looks like. We have to talk about what constitutes harassment, because a lot of girls especially, but boys can also be harassed, don't know what constitutes harassment and don't know what constitutes coercion. We have to talk to them about how to respond if they feel like they're being harassed or coerced, and role play with them, give them words. All these things are important to do. We have to also talk to them about our experiences with love, I think, hard as that is, if they're open to it. And for a lot of this, I think it is being guided by them about what they're open to and being tuned into them. But making ourselves available for those conversations, because I think if we can be available and listen non-judgmentally, they're going to want to talk to us more and more, and we're going to earn their respect more, and we're going to be more effective as mentors for them with these things. And in terms of the issues around single parents, whether you're a single mom or a single dad, you know, in one way, I think that you're disadvantaged in the sense that you're not, you know, you cannot talk about the experience of being a boy if you're a single mom, but you sure can talk about the experience of being a woman. And what if your son is heterosexual, what it really means to be respectful and caring in a relationship, and how you experience men as disrespectful, and how you experience men as respectful. I will say that another issue we find in this is more our qualitative research, our interviews, is I have a lot of conversations with single moms who find that when their boys hit adolescence, they start reproducing those qualities in men that drive them crazy. And they end up in having a lot of conflict with their adolescent boys because those boys are acting like the narcissistic men they've had to deal with for too long. And, that's a complicated problem. And it's one that I think you have to talk to your women friends about, your male friends about, because some of this may have to do with your son, but some of it may also have to do with your transference, the ways in which you're transferring a whole set of experience you've had onto your son, which may not be appropriate for somebody who's 13 or 14 in a very different developmental stage. The other thing I would just say about this, I could go on and on about this, Laura, and I think this is a big question, so I don't want to talk too much, but I will just say, because I'm worried I'm going to forget to say it later, that I worry, and you all may disagree with me about this, that some of the language we use to talk about love with boys, they experience as feminizing. I'm not saying that should be the case, but when we talk about having empathy or we talk about kindness, they experience that as feminizing. And I'm not suggesting, this is a lot of my work, we shouldn't develop empathy in boys and kindness with boys, but sometimes there's a different kind of language that I think is more helpful with boys. And the language is, it's really easy to degrade women. It's really easy to expect from women images that you see in porn. It's really easy to conform to your peer group if they're rating women from 1 to 10. If you want to do something really courageous and really honorable and really decent, learn how to treat somebody well. Learn how to treat a woman really well and decently. That's what men are failing to do. If you want to be strong, that's what you have to learn how to do, is to learn somebody well. Learn to love somebody really well. What you're doing is weak. It's lame. Anyway, I'm suggesting to you that my guess is that vocabulary is going to be more effective in talking to boys and men about love. Why don't I stop there? Because I said a lot.
Yeah.
And
we'll go back to the 3 and 4, challenge 3 and 4, and we'll touch on some questions again after that.
Okay, great. So I will share with you the slides again. All right. So we didn't get to this slide, but this is what I'm suggesting to you is the real crisis. And here's the challenge number 3, which is how can older adults prepare young adults for caring, ethical, romantic relationships? So I think there are a few problems here. One is that that sex ed is not about love. It should be, and that we have entrusted one of the most important things that we do in life, which is to have healthy, caring sexual relationships, to people, the most important and one of the most complicated and fraught and emotionally charged. We've entrusted it to people that we don't train, that we don't really support, that don't have status, that don't exist in a professional culture that's in which they're enabled to improve. It is, sorry, I'm being adamant about this or ardent about it, but it is a tragedy what is happening with the field of sex ed in this country. These people should be well-trained, well-supported, have status. They're doing a profoundly important thing. I think the other challenge is that we're not able to talk across very different experiences of love. That when I say, I love you to my wife now, I'm often talking about history. I am talking about the deep appreciation that comes from being married to somebody for 30 years and the shared experience that we have had. when I said I love on our wedding day, I was talking about imagination. And I think that at every moment in time, love is a kind of conversation between history and imagination. But I think there's a lost in translation problem, that it's very hard for me to talk to my kids who are all in their 20s, and especially hard when they were in high school, about what this experience of history is. And that we need to get better at talking about this experience in a way that is guiding to them and also exciting to them. And we are often failing to do that. Steinberg calls the form of love that I'm having now with my wife companionate love. But I worry that sounds like what you have with your dog and not with what you have with your partner. And that there's something dazzling about the kind of love you can have 30 years in, but it's a quiet form of dazzling, and we don't really have the vocabulary to describe it well. And we need to develop that vocabulary. I also think that we have a lot of wisdom, that people who've gone divorced, people who have miserable marriage, they still have a lot of wisdom to share with young people, and that they have to realize that wisdom and have the confidence. But I wanted to tell you a quick story. I hope it's not too long, that really helped me understand my own failings in this regard and my need to develop more wisdom. And this happened when my daughter was about 13 or 14 years old, and she had brought home her boyfriend at the time after school, and my wife wasn't going to be home, and she asked me if I could come home from work early and just be around the house because she was only 13 or 14 years old. And I got home and I went up to the second floor, and she was in her room with the door closed, and I paced back and forth, and I thought, what am I going to do? She's in there with the door closed. I realized, look, she's 13 years old, 14 years old. I'm not comfortable with this. So I knocked on the door, and she opened the door, and I said, I don't want you in there without the door open. And she said, fine. And then a few minutes later, she came out and she said, Tucker, who is her boyfriend at the time, we'd like to play ping pong in the basement. And I have to tell you that I've been trying to get her to play ping pong with me for about 4 years. She's not playing ping pong with me, but very happy to play ping pong with Tucker. I said, fine, you can go down to the basement to play ping pong. But they're down there, and I start to worry again. And on our first floor, there are grates. And I found myself lying on the floor on the first floor with my ear to the grate, trying to hear whether the ping pong ball was going back and forth. And my son knocks on the door. My oldest son comes in. He's 17 at the time. He's 16. And he sees me on the floor, and he says, Dad, what the hell are you doing on the floor? And I told him, and he got down on the floor with me. So both of us are with our ears to the grate, listening for the ping pong ball. And the ping pong ball is going back and forth, and then suddenly it stops. And it stops for a while, and my heart starts going up into my throat. My son grabs a baseball bat out of the closet and runs downstairs. And my daughter pops upstairs very fast, furious at me, like, why don't you trust me? And she says, why don't you trust me? And I told her that I did trust her, but there are circumstances where I worry, and I was not feeling proud of my behavior. My wife came home and she said, one thing I've learned from this experience is I'm never leaving you at home with our kids when there's a partner in the house. But I also realized how unprepared I was to talk to my daughter about this, and how much I had reproduced an old trope, which men are predators, boys are predators, girls are prey. Trevor was about half her, what was his name? It wasn't Trevor, it was Tucker, sorry. Tucker was about half her size, by the way. And the sweetest kid. And, I realized I have to tell her she can be vulnerable in situations, but I also have to tell her she has agency, and talk to her about the importance of being assertive and not treat her like she's a helpless victim in these situations. So she and I are watching Grey's Anatomy, and this is what I mean by watching TV. We used to watch Grey's Anatomy together. and I don't know if you remember, those of you who watch Grey's Anatomy, McDreamy or McSteamy, but little Grey is having this affair with, I think, McSteamy, who's about 10 or 15 years older than her. Was it McDreamy that she was having the affair with? Sorry.
McSteamy. No, McSteamy.
Oh,
And this is
okay.
entirely still very relevant, Dr. Weissbourd. So this is a very relevant example.
Oh, good. So I'm watching the show with her, and McSteamy, and little Grey comes into McSteamy's apartment and says, you know, you really have to teach me. Like, you have to teach me about romance and about sex. And I'm just groaning. And I said to my daughter, it's really important to me that when you enter a relationship with somebody, that you are assertive about what you need in love, about in a relationship, about what you need in sex, and that you're clear about what your needs are, romantic and sexual. And she said to me, if you ever say anything like that to me again, I will never speak to you. But I'm not sorry I said it. And this is my point. Like, we have to be able to, when we're watching TV, when we're doing things, we have to be able to say these things. We have to be able to tell our daughters it's really important to assert your needs. And we have to be able to say to them, you have to talk about your own pleasure too. It's not just about boys' men, or it's not just about your partner's pleasure. If you're in an LGBTQIA relationship, it's not just about another person's pleasure. It's about your own pleasure, and you have to be able to convey that. And that's going to be something that is going to make kids cringe. But when we see an image like this on TV, it's important to say. And these are some of the ways we can also develop our own wisdom and confidence. When we are more attuned to what they're seeing and more reflective about what is happening with them. Sorry, I'm going the wrong way here. So I just want to offer you a few other thoughts about talking about love with young people. One is that I think we can be romantic philosophers with them. And we can talk to them, and they will want to. This is my experience with young people. They really want to talk about this. I sat in an English class with an English teacher in high school who was using a novel as a platform, a springboard for talking about love. And the students were enthralled. They were so interested in talking about it. What are the many forms of love? What's the difference between obsession, lust, caring, mature love? How can you tell the difference? Why do you feel intense feelings for somebody that you're not in love with? Is this person a good person? What makes you think they're good? We can become much more literate about what they're hearing from their friends, school, media, consumer, and religious message, and think about how we want to counter and supplement those messages. We can discuss these key relationship questions. How do you know if you're in love with someone? How might love change? Why are we attracted to people who are bad for us? These are things most of us experience at some point, being attracted to someone who can't be a good partner for us. Why won't we join a club that will have us? How are LGBTQIA relationships and experiences and challenges the same or different from heterosexual relationship experiences and challenges? What can we learn from these relationships about healthy romantic relationships? And we can become literate because so many of our kids are exploring in some ways, both their gender identity and their sexual orientation. And we can think about, what does this mean for their romantic relationships and their sexual relationships? Why can we be attracted to other people even when we're in love? This is something even in high school and college people start experiencing. And it's a key question for all of us at every age. Okay, the next part is about misogyny and sexual harassment. But Laura, why don't I stop there and just take questions people have?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah, that would be great. Honestly, a lot of the pre-submitted questions really stem nicely from the basis that you've just provided.
Yep.
So I'm happy to also have Eileen manage the chat and we can see what goes on there, but I don't want to, I'm cognizant of time and I want to just make sure we hit on those that were submitted in advance. And they're very
I've already talked a little bit about preventing misogyny and sexual harassment too, and I can summarize it very quickly too, if that's helpful.
Okay, helpful. I'm going to start with this question here, just stemming from where you left off on those slides. This comes from a parent who asks, my son identifies as gay I am going with the assumption that the messaging is the same, gay or straight, in terms of forming healthy, ethical, romantic relationships. But I would love to know if there's anything in particular that I need to be aware of when having these conversations.
Yeah, I think that it's a wonderful question, first of all. And I think the assumption is totally right in one sense that, there are basics about reciprocity and safety and care and tenderness that you want to have, and pleasure that you want to have with your kids, no matter what their gender orientation or sexual orientation is. A lot of those conversations I want to have is about pleasure, especially, they're not going to want to have with you. But there are resources that they can go, online resources, and there may be other people, an aunt, an uncle, an older sibling, somebody you trust, a cousin, who could have these conversations with them. And there are also online resources. In our report, we have a whole range of online resources for both heterosexual and LGBTQIA young people around talking about these issues. I do think that, one of the things to be mindful of if there are two boys is, and I really recommend that you look that you watch really quickly, it's only 5 minutes long, a conversation that Kurt has with his son on the television show Glee. And Kurt's son is gay. And it's a wonderful conversation. I think Kurt handles this beautifully. And one of the things that he says is that in male-male relationships, that, men do have this challenge. And the challenge is to learn how to combine sex with vulnerability, with real vulnerability. And that in a gay relationship with two men, one of the things that can be even more challenging is you may have two men who are having trouble being vulnerable. And so that's one of the reasons, two males that are having trouble being vulnerable. And that's one of the reasons it's especially important to be communicative in that relationship and to recognize together that that might be what is going on. I think there are other tendencies with girls and women that may be different, that, and again, I don't want to cartoon or caricature boys or girls here, because some boys are very empathic and vulnerable. Some girls are not empathic and vulnerable. But generally speaking, I think girls' emotional lives are much more ornate and complicated, and they're much more available to their feelings. And their feelings tend to be very intense and charged. And a lot of times in a girl-girl relationship or a woman-woman relationship, it can be more about dialing down or managing really intense feelings that emerge, really intense and complicated feelings, and drama that occurs. And you hear about this a lot in girl-girl and women-women relationships. So there are other things as well, but those are some of the things that I would think about.
There is a question in the chat. It says, when sex ed teachers are not allowed to discuss the existence of gay, non-binary, or trans kids, what are we to do? We need our schools to represent our students first and foremost. So it's a bit of a question and a bit of a statement.
So, I'm finding the politics of our schools at this moment, and including about conversations about race, which I just have to say, to be very troubling. And so I think that this is something we should be advocating for at our schools. I think that we shouldn't be, we should fight not to be silenced or marginalized by the loudest voices who are maybe anti-gay or anti-talking about homosexuality or LGBTQIA issues, that this is not an area we want to just surrender. But I also think that the reality is that a lot of schools aren't going to do it. And I don't, that may be true in your district. And that means we have to do it. We have to, again, find online resources for our kids that will be helpful. We have to find people they can talk to. There are support groups of different kinds for LGBTQIA students that they can access. There's a lot of terrible stuff going on online, but there's also some great stuff going on online. And this is one of the things that is good that is going online. Is LGBTQIA students, QTIA students often find people like them online. and healthy and in a supportive way. Anyway, so those are my thoughts about this very good question.
Yeah. There are some excellent resources, like Dr. Weissbourd said, at the end of the document that Eileen placed in the chat, put out by his research and his group. So it's called The Talk, and there are lots of good resources for both heterosexual and homosexual relationships. I'm going to move to the next question, just in continuing the flow here. This is just an extension of this topic right here, and somebody is looking for some assistance in addressing the issues of teens transitioning to same-sex relationships, but a little bit of guidance on how you might have a conversation around setting boundaries for sleeping arrangements, because not all same-sex relationships will be romantic, and this parent is looking for some assistance in how to have conversations around setting boundaries for sleepovers, knowing that it's so important to maintain friendship at the same time right now.
Yeah, this is another wonderful question. I will say just something for you to think about, which I certainly think about, which is, the Dutch feel very differently about this issue. The Dutch tend to feel like much better for our kids to sleep, if they have a partner, to sleep under our roof than to have sex in a car or have sex in a park. And rates of STDs and pregnancy are significantly lower in Amsterdam than they are in major cities in this country. So I am not suggesting you do that lightly. We are in a very different culture than the Dutch are, but I do think it's worth thinking about or considering, because there's something important, I think, in it. I think the answer to this question is really knowing your, and I'm not saying this is easy, but knowing your child, knowing, being able to listen to your child and to understand what kind of relationship this is, knowing whether you can trust your child. Hopefully you can. And if you're doing the listening, and if you do feel like you know your child, I think you're going to have a pretty good sense about whether this is a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship, or is not a romantic relationship or a sexual relationship. If you're uncertain, that's a more complicated issue. I mean, the other issue is, where is your child developmentally? This is really different for a child who's 13 than a child who's 18 or 19. So there are a whole bunch of factors that I would consider. A relationship for a 13-year-old or a 14-year-old that seems platonic may not become platonic, and a 13 or 14-year-old may not be able to anticipate that in a way that a 17 or 18-year-old, a more mature person, can anticipate that. I think it also raises the issue that if you have a child who is gay, should they be allowed to have a sleepover? Let's say you have a child who's female and gay. Should they be able to have a friend who is a boy sleepover? And I think, again, this is an issue of knowing and trusting your child. And if you don't trust, then it becomes much more, if you don't feel like you know your child well enough and have enough trust, it becomes more complicated. But if you're doing hopefully, I think in most cases, if you're doing the deep listening, you're going to have a good sense of this.
Thank you.
Sorry, there's just one other issue which I don't want to underestimate. That's talking to the parents of the kid's partner to make sure, to see what they're comfortable with, and talking to your kid about how this might be perceived by other people in the community, if that's an issue. I'm not saying that's a reason not to do it, but I think everybody should go into it knowing how it might be understood and perceived.
Thank you. The next two questions are kind of combined. They're really about communicating facing a particular challenge. And in this case, the challenge is how to maintain a balance in your conversation. So the first question, which leads to the second, how do you balance having an open discussion about intimacy with your teen's sense of privacy and awkwardness? Taking that a step further, another parent asks, and then if your teen son literally closes the door entirely and refuses to engage in this conversation, what do I do next? Do I write him a note? So I love these questions as sort of a building off one another, and if you could touch on that.
So this is another great question, and tell me Laura or somebody, if I don't answer all there are a few different parts of it. So if I
Yeah.
don't answer all parts of it. So,
Okay.
I think I am making the case to you that there's some things that you should say to your child, whether or not it makes them cringe or not. There are certain things you should say to your child, like when they become adolescents, that you have to be safe when you are having sex, that you have to respect other people, and have a conversation about what respect looks like and means. Catcalling is not respectful. Girls don't like it, for example. Rating girls from 1 to 10 is disrespectful. I mean, really spell out what respect means. That you have to, care is important. Protection is important. I mean, there are things that you have to say to your kids, and it may make them cringe. There are other things that, have to do with sexuality, anxiety about sexuality, pleasure in sexuality, uncertainty about sexuality, that you may not be the right person for them to talk to. I think you want to make yourself available to that and open to that, but also say to them, I realize there are lots of things you may not want to talk to me about about this, but I really want you to talk to somebody, or, if it's not me, to somebody. Or to at least look at this resource online that I'm going to share with you. To give you one example, this comes up, I think men, fathers, and mothers have to talk to their sons about female pleasure. I worry a lot about the degree to which sex in high school and college is organized around men's pleasure and not women's pleasure. And that the terms we even use for sex now, like I crushed that, I hit that, etc. They're demeaning, they're degrading, and that this thing around porn is real. We have too many boys and men who are saturated with porn. And so you have to have this conversation. We have to counter this flood of images that a lot of boys and young adults, young men are experiencing. And that means you don't have to talk to me about pleasure, but you need to talk to somebody about pleasure and what that really looks like for you as a woman or as a girl.
That connects with another question pre-submitted, and you've touched on it. I just want to make sure I've asked it completely in case there's anything else you'd like to add. How do you suggest parents manage what our teens are learning on social media about intimacy, love, sex, and romantic relationships? And I know something in the report, the talk, you suggest that if we don't have the kinds of conversations that you just mentioned, the kids will fill the void, and they will turn to, like this person submitted, social media and popular culture to fill that void. So you've mentioned it, but I didn't know if there was just anything else you wanted to say there. This person is concerned about exactly that.
Yeah, no, I think it's, I think that this person is exactly right. That's the default. If we don't have these conversations, if we don't counter these images in this narrative, that is what's going to happen. And kids are going to learn about it from, not just from, I learned about it from about sex from my older brother, who's 2 years older than me. And I cannot tell you how much misinformation he gave me. I mean, we're also learning from our older siblings or an older cousin or somebody who's 3 years old, and sometimes very wise and often not so wise. So, these are things to check in with kids about, and it depends what it is periodically, but it also means being, again, as I said, when you see an image on TV, on the radio, a song, whatever, engaging with them about it and having some proactive conversations where and one of those conversations is about pleasure. And I think it's totally makes sense to say to kids, you're going to hear a ton of stuff from your friends, maybe from your older siblings, from TV, whatever, these various sorts, from social media, and it's going to be wrong. It's just going to be wrong. And it's going to be harmful to you, and it's going to be harmful to other people. And so you got to, there's a fake news problem here, and you got to be able to be a critical consumer of these this information, this news.
Yep. Thank you. In the chat, it's an extension. Do you find kids are more or less knowledgeable with the advent of social media? Is it a good or bad thing?
I'm not an expert on social media. I would say that it cuts so many different ways, though, that people do find information on social media, good information they would not found other ways, and they also can be inundated with bad information. And it has turned a lot of sexuality and romance, it's made it performative too. And there's a lot of curated images on social media, over-sexualized and curated, and also images of love that can make people feel defective too, that it looks like everybody else is in some very satisfying romantic relationship or having a very satisfying sexual relationship, and it's not, it's not accurate. It's been very curated and it's performative.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This question asks, how do you advise suggesting to a teenager that they wait for marriage to have sex? In a way, however, that lets them know that they can still come to talk to you, even if they decide not to wait.
Yeah. So this is a great question, and I respect people's, there's my main field is moral character, and I frequently have conversations with someone in the field who I respect enormously, named Tom Lacona. And we debate this all the time, because I'm not for teaching kids abstinence. He is very much for teaching kids abstinence. And they're, I understand both their moral principles behind both positions. I don't, there are a range of reasons why I think I'm right. There are a range of reasons why he thinks he's right. And so I respect this person's point of view, even though I don't, I think that there are many positive things that happen when young people have healthy relationships prior to marriage. But again, I respect this person's view. So I think that I think the messaging around this is that I think we want to share with our kids two things. One is, this is what I really believe, and this is what I really think is important. And if what you think is important is waiting until marriage to have sex, I think that's an important thing to share. And I think they need to know why and why you think it is. And I think that it's really worth a conversation, because where they can voice their views and you can voice your views, and they hear you. And I think you could also say, but what's really most important to me is, or what's just as important to me certainly, is that we're in open communication about this and other things too. So, if you ever do things that you think are disappointing me, I hope you'll talk to me about it. And I hope you'll know that there may be even some cases where I will punish you in some way, but I will appreciate your honesty, and it will strengthen our relationship. And I will, I make the same commitment to you. Because I don't think we want our kids to go underground. That's what I worry about, is they're going underground and not talking to us. And so I think that some message around, you're an adolescent, you're going to make mistakes. We all made mistakes. I made mistakes. I hope you'll talk to me about those mistakes or things you did that you worry about disappointing me is important.
Great, thank you. This question is the challenge of communicating with your teenagers after you've discovered information that they didn't share with you. So what do you suggest doing when you find that your teen hasn't shared with you that they are in fact sexually active? How do you support and educate them indirectly without violating their privacy?
So, I think one is another really good, interesting, important question. I think one thing that I would wonder is, well, first of all, I would wonder how you found out as the parent.
Mm-hmm.
It would make a big difference if your child had told you that they were sexually active. And if that were the case, I would say, I really appreciate your telling me and your willingness to share that information with me. And if you as a parent are concerned about it, I would say both, I really appreciate it, and here's what I'm concerned about and why I'm concerned. And you really need to be able to listen too, to listen to what your child's experience was. Did your child have a really wonderful, joyous, gratifying experience, or did they have a scary experience, or an experience that made them less confident and more unsure? So I think that kind of inquiry and open conversation is really important to have. If you heard it from somebody else, that's a really tricky one, and it may involve protecting the confidentiality of the person who told you. It may or may not be true. And if you're worried about it, my suggestion would be to ask your child, if you're worried about it, to ask your child if it is true and to express your concerns about it. If you're not worried about it, I would probably leave it up to your child about whether they want to discuss it with you.
Okay. And then we just have one question, and I know it's getting late, but the last one here, for those of us, well, myself not included, because I no longer have young children, but for those of our audience that do, how do you recommend laying the foundation of open communication on this topic with younger children, ages 6 to 10, for instance? This person is especially interested in ways to talk with her boys about how to be respectful, open, and emotionally available.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to talk to boys about emotional availability and those aren't the words you would use, but expressing your feelings and identifying and articulating your feelings. But I will also tell you that in my experience, a lot of 6 to 10-year-old boys aren't going to be able to do it. It doesn't mean you shouldn't say it and lay the groundwork for it, but they're not going to be able to do it. And I think this is, a conversation about boundaries in part, and respecting people's boundaries. I think it's a conversation about reciprocity often. You don't use that word again, but is this a way you would like to be treated by somebody else? It's sort of a golden rule conversation. Sometimes it's a platinum rule conversation, which is some other people, the platinum rule is that people are different from you and they may want to be treated in a way that's different from the way you want to be treated too. And a girl in this case may want to be treated differently than in a way that's less aggressive than a way that you could tolerate being treated. I mean, that's a conversation to have. But I think a conversation about boundaries and a conversation about sort of erring on the side of respect in these situations is really important. That you as a parent really value. It's really important to you as a parent that your child treat everybody well. That we have high expectations for caring and respect in all situations in our family. That's who we are as a family. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your time, your expertise. I think a lot of these comments could have led to their own presentations, but this is sort of the first time we're hosting this conversation. I imagine we'll pull together some thoughts on additional conversations to have in the future. But I do want to make everyone aware, again, we will have this recording available. I'll talk with Dr. Weissbourd about making a version of the slides available, or at least the data, because I thought that was a really good point of parents, that I can myself imagine sharing some of those numbers with my older kids to debunk some of the myths of the hookup culture and such. So we'll work on that and make it available to everyone who registered tonight and on our website. So Dr. Weissbourd?
This was a real pleasure. I'm happy to answer questions by email if that's helpful. Is Chris your husband?
Yes, I thought I was going to slip off of here without the yes, well, he is. I am a lucky woman.
He answered the question about love beautifully. Lucky you.
Yes.
She's
Yes,
definitely
thank
not
you.
going to hear the end of that.
I am now never going to hear exactly the end of that. But yes, no, I'm quite lucky. So I appreciate everyone being here. Please follow up with us with questions you have. Dr. Weissbourd is so accessible. And we can flesh out more of these thoughts and ideas even via email and plan another discussion at some point if need be. So
All right,
thank you.
I'm sorry we didn't get to meet in person, all of you, but thank you for your
I
really
know.
thoughtful questions. It was a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll stay in touch. We'll keep in touch. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Thank you.
Laura,
Thanks
you can
all.
stop the recording.